Dun da 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 da. Dun 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 da 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 da. Dun 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 da da. Dun 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 da 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 da. You have reached your Two Spirit Aunties podcast. Please leave us a message after the tone. Da 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 da. Today, we are going to be talking about Indigenous Peoples Day and topics surrounding that. Joining us today is an amazing, amazing person, a really good friend of ours, a beautiful, helpful, wonderful community member. Chenoa Landry is going to be joining us, and we love her so much. We have mentioned her on this podcast before. It is a little few days past Indigenous Peoples Day. However, we are still in the sort of, I guess, 2 to 3 months of, I guess it's 3 months of indigeneity, some of it being beautiful, others of it being kind of stressful, September, October, November. So I think that it will work great to talk about Indigenous Peoples Day and maybe even expanding a little bit into what are some of the troublesome aspects of this time of year and how do we cope with it? What are some of the ways that we are able to connect together as relatives and community members, as Native and Indigenous people? I'm super excited about this convo. Chenoa, say hello. Would you mind introducing yourself in the way that feels good to you?
Sure, thanks, Shilo. Hot, Lachel, Twagwalapu, Gwalapu, Eshed, Siaya, Yep, Chalep, Chenoa Landry, Seed, Stat, Spoyalip, Ched. Good afternoon, relatives. You're all my family and my community and my relatives. And my name is Chenoa. I am a member of the Puyallup tribe, and I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, it's good to be here. It's good. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited.
And I'm excited about this topic too. There's a lot going on with Indigenous Peoples Day, and it happens the month before Native American Heritage Month, which is also a complicated month for a lot of us. So I'm excited to talk about it. Shilo?
Yeah, thank you. I just want all the listeners to know that Chenoa is going to be working on beaded moccasins for a gala auction piece as we're talking, and just so you can imagine that happening, and how a lot of us do art or some kind of something with our hands while we're talking to help us focus and also to give us that extra time to get those projects done that we said we were going to do. I don't know about you, but love starting projects, oftentimes struggle with finishing them. So I see Chenoa nodding yes and no. Brianna, are you one of those people?
Oh yeah, I think I had a beaded hat rim on my loom for like 4.5 years. I just built a new loom so that I could start a new project.
That's tenacity. That's dedication.
I did finish it though. It just took me a while.
Hey, no worries, right? We're not on the colonizers' time. Right, if it takes you your entire life to finish a, beaded this or a carving that or a weaving that, hey, your ribbon skirt, you started at the age of 16 and you finish it at 60. That's exciting. I mean, probably your whole entire family and community are going to get together for that finished project. Yeah, I say go for it.
It's true. Also, like, to balance it out, I started a ribbon skirt on Indigenous Peoples Day and I finished it 2.5 hours later and got to wear it to the Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. So I feel good about that one.
I feel like one of the keys perhaps for us is that when we have somewhere that we're going to wear it, there's some kind of deadline, there's something that we need to do to finish the project. That's super helpful as well. And so, yeah, Chenoa, do you have any remarks about this conversation so far?
I would say some of my best work has been done at 5:00, 2 hours before grand entry on a Friday night. So there's nothing wrong with finishing something at the last minute, and also what's cool about starting projects and not finishing them until years later is that like I've came across stuff that I started literally in 2000, and then I was like, oh my gosh, like I've noticed that how much I've grown since then in my art or whatever, and so I just like repurpose. I'm like,
Yeah.
I might as well just take it apart and reuse the now vintage beads. But like, what was I?
Turn of the century beads.
I'm the turn of the century. Yeah, I was like, what was I thinking? Why was I? What color combo is this? I don't know. It was a strange times.
I
2000.
remember at the beginning of the pandemic that you were working on like a piece of regalia. I think it was a ribbon. I think it no, not a ribbon skirt. It was a wing dress. And I remember you posted a picture of it and you had a matching mask. And it was
Oh
really
yeah.
cool. And I was like, that's Chenoa. She just knows how to just get it done, roll with life, and that's one of the things I really love about our people is that we, change so quickly and adapt so quickly to our environment and what's going on. And I just really, really respect that about you and our
Oh,
people.
yeah, definitely got to learn from our ancestors and our parents' teachings or grandparents' teachings or relatives, definitely. And I was including a free cloth mask with every ribbon skirt. And then when cloth masks became faux pas because they're not actually as protective as the N95 masks, and I would like with every ribbon skirt order, I would just like throw in some extra like N95 masks, keep the people safe.
Love it. So good. Again, adaption, right?
Yep, right.
I will never forget the beginning of the pandemic where it was what do they call him? They're like a doctor for the country, and he had like a scrap of cloth. He was in like his, you know, he's like the US
Like Fauci?
surgeon.
Is
No,
that?
no, not Fauci. It's like the Surgeon
Oh
General
yeah.
Oh,
office.
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And he
Oh
was
yeah.
like in his military outfit, I think, if I
Mhm.
remember correctly. And there was like a table, and he was just had this like random piece of cloth, and he was like cutting it up or like folding it up. And then he had like some, I think it was rubber bands or something. And he was like,
Oh
you can do
yeah.
this. And I was just like, huh, okay.
Well,
It's like
yeah, even the CDC had like how to make t-shirt masks
Yeah.
online, which like that's all we had at the time and that's
Yeah.
what we knew. But also when you were talking about like being adaptable, right? Like I remember at the beginning of the pandemic too, like all of the fantastic masks totally
Yes.
unusable, but that came out of our community, right? Like the full
Yes.
front beaded masks, the birch bark masks, just gorgeous masks that came out.
I feel like I saw a cedar mask,
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
which actually might be a good idea. And super medicinal. I don't know. That's not my realm of
Mhm.
understanding, but I thought it was really cool.
You can still wear them, you just want to put an N95 underneath. But I will say, from experience of double masking and then wearing like a cute mask on top, well, first of all, everybody thinks it's only a cloth mask, and then they like back away from me. Well, nobody backs away anymore because like nobody's masking anymore. But in the beginning, people would be like, she doesn't have a real mask on. You're like, no, I'm just covering. But second of all, nobody can hear you.
Yeah.
You have to like shout when you're double masked. Like you have to like scream, and then at the end you're like throat is sore, and you're like, oh my god, I have a sore throat. And it's like, oh yeah, because I've been like shouting for the past 2 hours.
The first like 2 months of the pandemic, I think, or maybe it was like a month. I think it was like 2 months. It might have even gone into 3. Every night I would take my temperature because I had so much anxiety, and it helped me calm down. And I remember telling my doctor at the time I was doing that, and she was like, that's a little excessive, Shiloh. She's like, but
Well,
if it
yeah.
helps your anxiety, I'm like, so yeah.
But also now you know your baseline temperature because everybody's
Yes.
temp is different. So
It's a little on the
kudos
lower
to you.
side. It's a little on the lower side.
So is mine. I always
Yeah.
when mine goes up like 1 degree, I'm like, oh my god, I think it's the beginning of a fever. And then I'm like, oh wait, okay, probably it's just hot outside. And I just ran up the stairs to grab the thermometer.
That feels very relatable.
I got my COVID booster on Friday afternoon. I got
Nice.
the bivalent, except for I called it bioluminescent, and my doctor thought it was hilarious. She was like, "That's amazing." And anyways, I was like, "Oh, I'm not having any issues." And then 3 p.m. yesterday, it was like I got hit by a car, and my body was
Oh.
like, "No." And I was like, "This is terrible." And I was like super achy. So
Mm.
I took some acetaminophen and stuff and felt a little bit better. And then this morning, my lymph node on the arm, like in my armpit of the same arm, was like
Mhm.
kind of swollen. And I was like trying to tell my body, like, this is fake sick. Like,
Mhm.
you don't really have a virus, but my body,
Mhm.
my immune system's just kind of like, whatever.
It's a test run.
So, yeah, it's a test run. And I'm like, wow, this was like a really strong vaccine, I guess. So
Mhm.
body like really, I'm feeling better now. It was like only like 24 hours of weirdness, but
Oh, good. Yeah, I've
yeah.
heard that from other people too, where they said that it felt it lasted like anywhere from like 6 to 10 hours, and then they felt fine after that,
Yeah.
like it went away. Mine,
It was kind of intense though. Like that time that it hit me and everything, it was intense. And I didn't have my
yeah,
lymph nodes swell up on the other one. So I was like, oh, this one's got a kick.
it's spicy.
It's spicy. This is a spicy vaccine.
Oh man, yeah, I'm glad that we didn't have. When our family got it, there's 4 of us that got it at the same time, and I was the only one that had any side effects, and it was like I had a sore arm, like real intensely sore, like more than the other ones. And I was like, oh man, this is sore, but I didn't have any body, any of the other like body reactions. And it was like they just acted like nothing happened, and I was like, you guys, we just got like, isn't that exciting? And they're like, cool. Anyways,
It's
yeah.
so weird to like know the like historicness of it all, right? Like how like powerful and how many people had to work to make it happen, and how much
Mhm.
time and intention and science and everything went
Mhm.
into it. And you're like, oh, it's like a tiny dinky shot in my arm and now it's
Yeah,
over.
it goes so fast. It was like
Yeah.
boom, 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 done. And I just read, speaking of historical moments, so I just read this morning that it's a couple, husband and wife in at Pfizer Biotech. They're the ones who helped to create the Pfizer. They say that the new vaccines are going to help them open the door to looking for the cure for cancer. It's like
Yeah.
in the near future. Like
That's
I don't know, well,
amazing.
near future in the scope of over the course of, I mean, it could be 10,
Of
20 years.
science.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, science takes a long time.
It reminds me though, like the basis for the COVID vaccine also helped with like HIV and AIDS research
Mm-hmm.
too, right? Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah.
They
Yes.
also seem to have a breakthrough on, this was like last year, I feel, on what is it called? It's Epstein-Barr virus.
Oh,
They
yeah.
also
yeah.
had they were thinking that they're on the breaking into getting a vaccine for Epstein-Barr, which they think also causes MS and potentially
Mhm.
other autoimmune diseases. And Epstein-Barr, just if people don't know, that's like mononucleosis,
Mm.
is the other name of that virus. And many people, it's super, super common, but they think it might be one of the factors that create a lot of autoimmune diseases.
Dang.
And they did find a connection to MS, multiple sclerosis.
Dang.
So
Yeah.
Wild.
some really big discoveries happening with the vaccines.
I was actually going to ask Chenoa, like, how do you know so much about all of this stuff? Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. Oh, yes. We want to know what you do.
Well, first of all, my brain is like autopiloted. And so anytime I hear anything of that word combination that you said, I immediately go into my mind, Whitney Houston, how will I know? So how will I know? Just kidding. Sorry, delete that part.
No, we can, but can we leave it in? It's really cute.
So my official job is I'm a community health worker, and I work with Native Wellness Institute. We are a part of the Future Generations Collaborative here in the Portland area. And I received my community health worker training in 2011, I think. But I didn't work as an official CHW until the pandemic began. So I carried that training with me and used it in my work. Now I'm officially full-time community health worker. And I love it because my background, my educational background is in community health, or public health, I should say. And so a community health worker is a person who's like a liaison between public health officials and we are health workers, but we're not doctors or nurses. I mean, some people have both trainings, but anyways, the CHW is more of a person who kind of works with community members. So we are usually a community health worker will work with their own, or with, they'll be a part of the community. So, you know, you'll see like a lot of different communities having community health workers representing them. And like some people, let's say if they're working with a community who English is a second language for them, then they will be a speaker of that language. So that's kind of what a community health worker since I've been a CHW throughout the pandemic, my focus has been working with folks in the Native community who are going through, impacted by COVID in some way. So in the beginning, it was more people who were exposed to COVID or had been diagnosed with COVID or lost employment due to COVID, things like that. So just working with them to find resources and trying to debunk all of the myths that were and are going around about COVID and vaccines and everything else. So long story short, we're not just focused on COVID. We also work with many different health. When we started talking about all of the things that the medical workers ask when you get signed in, like it's probably because some public health official saw the numbers and was like, okay, let's narrow it down. And so what a community health worker is kind of that person in between that relays that information to community members.
That was a good synopsis. Well, should we talk a little bit about Indigenous Peoples Day, since it just happened, and maybe we know some history about it, maybe we don't, and we just want to talk about our feelings, and maybe we do both. I don't know.
Yeah, sounds good.
What do we know about Indigenous Peoples Day?
Well, when I was growing up, it just really sounded very old-timey. In the last century, my family, we didn't say we were Indigenous. We were Indians, and we were Puyallup first, and then and I'd always have to explain that to non-Indians. Like they'd be like, Puyallup, what is that? And so then I'd have to explain, like, it's a tribe, it's a Native American tribe. And then they're like, what? Like, and then, you know, there was like all of these weird things that people would think, you know, I think we've all heard those things. And so when I think the first time I really heard like Indigenous, like in the way that we use it, was like the band. Remember the band Indigenous from South Dakota? There's a band.
No.
And I'm sure you must have like seen them at some point. Well, anyway, and I was like, that's cool. They named their band Indigenous because we are Indigenous to this land. That's cool. I was like, I don't know. I just never, and it sounds much better than like Indians, because then we went through this whole phase. Well, our family went through this whole phase of like, you know, some folks in our family from a previous generation were like, we're not Native Americans, we're Indians. That's just who we are, and that's what I'm gonna say. And then other folks in my family would be like, don't say Indians, because that's not what we are. So I don't know, just I think the name in and of itself has made such a progression or whatever over the years. And so I don't know, I honestly don't know why the previous name of that holiday, because I know that we had that day to recognize a person who came to this continent.
He
But
who shall not be named.
of he who shall they who shall not be named.
There we go.
Yeah. But I don't know why that date was chosen. Do you? And
I think it was just a like cover up. Like we don't want that one. We'll take it.
Well, yeah, but why did they choose that date in particular to recognize that person of the past?
That's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that, but I did Google the band Indigenous while you were talking.
Oh yeah.
And I feel a little bit ashamed because they are from the Yankton Sioux Reservation. And they absolutely still go on tour, by the way.
Yeah. And like their songs are like they're kind of like bluesy, and they're really cool. I love their music. But what I was gonna say about that was that like I've also heard some folks of recent years saying that they don't identify as Indigenous either. Like they're native of this land, of this earth, of this earth that we are living on, this continent, but they don't like that term. And I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's like too, maybe it's too new, or I'm not really sure. But I do like that it's like the more awareness has been raised, because now if I say where I'm from or who I am or whatever, and I feel like it happens a lot less frequently. Maybe it's because I meet less people now that I don't know, but people don't generally go, Puyallup, what is that? So more people are coming correct. I don't know.
I think that what we call ourselves is always an interesting conversation too. Like, I think that could be a whole podcast.
Totally.
Shilo, do you have something to share?
Well, I did look up the history of Columbus Day if you want a little kind of sneak peek into it. Just gonna give you the brief synopsis. I'm not gonna read through all of it. Those who are listening who want to know everything, I'm sure you can find that out on the interwebs. It is October 12th, 1492 is when they who shall not be renamed arrived in the Americas. And apparently it is a holiday celebration that is celebrated in different parts of the Americas. And the interesting kind of thing about it in the United States, the history of it, the first Columbus Day celebration took place October 12th, 1792 in the Columbian Order of New York. And it says that some Italian Americans observe the holiday as a celebration of their heritage and not necessarily of they who shall not be named. And so apparently there was in 1892 a lynching in New Orleans of a mob murdered 11 Italian immigrants, and President Harrison at the time declared it a holiday as a one-time national celebration. And then 1934 there was lobbying by the Knights of Columbus and a New York City Italian leader named Generoso Pope were kind of talking about the importance of making it a national holiday. And it goes through and kind of talks about Italian immigrants seen as enemies and aliens. Then in 1971, it was officially recognized as a federal holiday in the United States.
And that took a while.
Yeah, it wasn't like a wham bam. And then it talks about non-observance by many states. So anyways, that's just some of the information about that particular holiday and its tie to Italian Americans
Mm-hmm.
potentially, and Italian immigration, and how Italian immigrants at one point were seen as like illegals and things like that. So, and I think a lot of us understand that different races of people and different groups of people throughout the history of the United States were seen as like public enemy number one for periods of time, and then were slowly sort of melted into the great pot of the US.
Whatever
So,
this is now.
yeah.
The
steaming pile of
The
trash.
the salad.
A weeping, rotting salad. And I'm saying that just because it's like super messy. Like there's a lot of messy happening. So yeah, that's a little bit of info on that particular day. And then, wanting to not observe it and to observe Indigenous Peoples Day instead.
Oh, I just remember at some point I did learn that he was Italian, but I must have forgot because I thought he was like Spanish or something. And then, but I remember what sticks out in my brain about I didn't learn that it was like an Italian celebrated holiday, honestly, until I watched The Sopranos on HBO. And I don't know if that's like I really hope that's not like offending, that doesn't offend anyone, but I didn't, my family's not Italian and I didn't grow up knowing a lot of Italians. I have one family member who's half Italian, but anyway, I was like, oh, I didn't, because I just remember seeing the episode and I was shocked that they were like fighting for the right to maintain this holiday, because I've only ever seen it or it was a statue. I think Tony Soprano was like mad because because native people in New York were like tearing down a Columbus statue or something. That's what I could be wrong on the plot line, but he was like furious because he was like so offended, and I was like, how dare he be offended? Like, this is our land. And then it was just like kind of like in my mind, I was like, oh, I see. Okay, now I think I had to do some research a little bit and like humble myself and be like, it's not always about me. It's not always about Native people, but isn't it though?
But it's
yeah.
I guess that was what I was gonna say. It's like, yeah, there have been like a lot of different folks that are now considered white came to this country and were treated terribly. And there is there's a true history of immigrants being treated terribly, and now being subsumed into white culture, which is just tears apart their own history, right? It hurts everybody. And that was very different than the annihilation that took place against an entire continent of people. Like, I just think that's a very different thing.
Can we say 2 continents of people?
Yes.
I mean, the total of the Americas.
That's true. Thank you, Shiloh. Yeah.
Like, that's millions and millions and millions of people. The 2 should not be conflated. That's true.
And not to mention the colonization of many other indigenous countries and continents in the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was systematic, very purposeful, was documented. It was improved upon.
And it was replicated all over.
Yes. Because they kept improving upon it, and they would write about it, and then they would send their books and journals back to, I think, the Catholic Church and the Catholic libraries for other people to be able to read. So that was my understanding.
Have you ever read Trevor Noah's book called Born a Crime? It is so good. You should read it. And he's talking about, there's a part where he talks about he's from South Africa, and he basically says all of that in a nutshell. He's like, everything that happened in America, like with slavery and whatever, and all of the things that happened with indigenous people, and he said that's what happened in South Africa all at once at the same time with apartheid. And he was like, he doesn't give a full history, obviously, because it's more his life story, but it's just like, you're right, it's like taking notes and every time getting, I don't know if it's better at the process of colonization or worse. I don't like the use of
Yes,
the
it depends
better.
on which side you're on.
Right, like they've got, it's just like when an abuser gets better at abusing, and like it's not an improvement, it's just better at what they're doing, which is
Yeah. It's wild to think about too, because it happened everywhere. Like the Nazis took chapter of the American History Handbook and used it.
Mm.
Right. And that's still like, it's still happening globally. We just don't talk about it as much. And so the need for Indigenous Peoples Day feels very real.
yeah.
Because I think too, like calling it Indigenous Peoples Day calls forward the fact that like borders are fake,
Yes.
right? And that like Indigenous people exist all over the world. And it should be our day to like celebrate what it is that makes us strong. And it reminds me of like what Shilo and I were talking about around survivance, right? You know, when I think of like Indigenous Peoples Day, that's what I think of. It's an act of survivance
Mm-hmm.
to be able to celebrate who we are. And I think Indigenous Peoples Day started like with a group of activists, of Native activists in like the early 90s. So it's relatively new. And I think it actually started in South Dakota, like as the first state to declare it. But like it hasn't happened nationally until very, very recently. And I don't know if it was with, I can't remember if Obama did it or if it was just with Biden.
Nationally,
Yeah.
I don't remember either, but I do remember like I was, a kid in the 90s, like I was all angsty, and so I can remember feeling like so much more empowered. Like it seemed like though as I got older, like it seemed like there was like more awareness. So like what is it called? The Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, I think, was passed around, and there was like the ebbs and flows of the Supreme Court rulings impacts our lives so much, and I think a lot of people don't know that, because you can see like NAGPRA and I want to say, was it what is it called, the act that protects Native American Arts and Crafts Act, is that what it's called? I don't know the
Yes.
official name.
Yeah.
They were passed around the same time, and it's because of like, okay, in the 70s there's like this rise of like the hippies and loving Native American culture, because we're like peace and loving and at one with the earth, right? And that's like kind of like this quasi like pan-Indian stereotype of like the hippies loved Native people and Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990. Thank you. And then I feel like there's always been like this romanticization of us, right? But then it just started like in the 80s, just like got worse or better, more popular. And then it's like we finally were like starting to get a voice, and perhaps my view is like more like jaded or whatever, because my dad was like really involved with our tribal politics, and so it was like in my face all the time. And like when we had a land settlement that went through the court cases, which we settled so that we could move on with our lives, but it just seemed like there was like kind of not the golden years, because definitely there were still a lot of things wrong, but in the 90s it just seemed like there was so much positive going on, and then it was like in the 2000s it like went down again. There was like, perhaps, and again, this is probably just my viewpoint, because there wasn't a lot of internet, and that was about the same era that I moved to California, and I was like feeling all like, like, where am I? Like, does anybody know we're still here? And but then, I'm hoping that this new wave of like awareness, it like stays, I want it to ebb and flow and continue to go upward, because with social media we do see like a lot of influencers, like social media influencers, and people really raising a lot of awareness of like, it is unbelievable to me that in this day and age, non-native people, so many non-native people are just now learning about the impact of boarding schools. I'm like,
Yes.
how could you not know that? This is like in your lifetime. Like, these are your, like, especially like some people who are of a certain age that are, don't know anything about us. I'm like, these are your peers. How could you, like, or they'll say like, I've never met a Native American. I'm like, how could you even say that? I don't know. So I think that even if it's just the one day, like, it's so important to like you said, Shiloh, earlier, every day is an Indigenous Peoples Day for most of us. But if there's one day of like national awareness or recognition, that it needs to be like set up now.
I also I really appreciate what you said about like every decision that gets made in the court system really impacts our lives in a different way than I think some of the other things that go forward. Like everything the Supreme Court does impacts all of our lives. I'm not taking that away, but
Mm-hmm.
but there's I remember, thinking about boarding schools and thinking about, religion and the role that religion played and all of that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the fact that, my grandmother was born not a citizen. My grandma, I am not that old,
Mm-hmm.
was born and she was not a citizen of this country. And to think about that, and to think about my dad was born and couldn't practice his own spirituality that my grandmother survived boarding school to practice,
Right.
because citizenship wasn't granted until 1924.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
then
that's only federal, like a lot
and
of
that
states.
right. Yeah. And before then you had to carry a passport to leave your reservation. And people, that is mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have also what is it? AIRFA, the American Indian Freedom of Religion Act,
Mm-hmm.
which wasn't we couldn't practice religion until 1978.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think we get the day. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
We get the one day.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that's important about this conversation too is like, even with a day of recognition, oftentimes these days of recognition, I think in the totality of the country, is seen as more of like a show, a performance, like, oh, look how cute they are in their regalia or costumes, as they probably, some people probably use that word, but look how cute they are. Look at them dancing. Look at them doing this or that. Whereas we're talking about these much deeper historical, cultural, legal aspects that a lot of the country is still not aware of, right? They're still not teaching accurate history and information in schools, which is a huge impact. And so I think that and they'll make these proclamations, all these different city governments, and, I've spoken at a few of them. I'm sure all of us have had our turns speaking at these proclamations, which, I'm not trying to say is not helpful and not good. But I don't know how much that impacts the rest of the population who is not Native, and their understanding at how deep all of this goes. And I recently saw this illustration of an iceberg, and I thought it was super helpful. It was like a cultural iceberg, and it was talking about culture in general. And it was kind of like at the top of the iceberg, you see like foods and clothing and maybe kind of very open spiritual practices. And then at the bottom, what you don't see are sense of time, more intricate, nuanced spirituality, customs that are very nuanced, history that's maybe unheard of, unknown. And so I think that's a piece here as well. But I think that social media can help with that. I think that social media helps for people to get their voices out there, to talk about these topics, to talk about the nuance of them, to share resources, and to normalize that we're just people. And these things have happened very recently, right? And I think the other piece too is that there's that legal federal connection between tribes and the federal government, that when the Supreme Court makes decisions, it directly impacts tribal nations. Whereas on the other hand, for everybody else, it directs you maybe on a personal level, not like a nationhood level. I probably am not articulating that very well. And so it's like, yeah, that hits me on a personal level, this or that, and that's impactful. However, when you're a part of a tribe that's federally recognized and is still very much impacted by the US government, even though you have like quote unquote tribal sovereignty, it's not an actual 100% pure sovereignty. You're a nation state basically. And so those Supreme Court decisions are impacting your entire tribal government and community, that is sometimes very much your actual cultural, spiritual, tribal beliefs, way of life, fishing, hunting, all of those aspects are impacted by those decisions. It's almost like it's super pure decision making, whereas it's kind of dissolved when it's an individual citizen that's not a tribal member. It's kind of diluted a little bit. I don't know if that helps people, but like I think like we're not a group of people of color. Like people who are tribal citizens have a legal standing in the United States that nobody else has. And also, I think is a very, very unique stance globally. And I don't know that anybody else has the same stance as Indigenous people around the world. I don't I don't know that there's other Indigenous people that have that relationship with their government. It's possible, but it's very unique and it's very, very complicated. Even if we're just talking about something like blood quantum, it's extremely complicated, and it's nuanced and layered and it's emotional and it's historical and it's past, present, future. And so I think those are some layers when we talk about Indigenous Peoples Day that I would love people to sort of think about, is that, yeah, it's like one of the things that Dr. James Banks, who is a multicultural professor up at the University of Washington, has this kind of like 4 stages of multiculturalism in the classroom, but you can actually take his framework and apply it to more things, which Dr. Cornell P.B. Wardy did when I was a teaching assistant for him. And sort of the first level of multiculturalism is often like foods, fads, and festivals. So like, let's celebrate Thanksgiving, let's celebrate, this or that. So, and then the other levels of understanding different groups of people comes at like understanding like the nuance of culture, that under the water kind of iceberg metaphor, and what has happened to people, historical and intergenerational trauma, legal issues, all that kind of thing. And so I'd love for people to get past foods, fads, and festivals of our people and other people of color, Black and brown folks. I mean, yes, it's beautiful and wonderful and amazing. However, what I really think will help people to understand is those more important issues and leave the celebrating to us as groups of people for our own survivance, but as allies for others to learn more deeply what's going on historically and currently. Thank you for listening to our podcast. And as always, we want to thank our amazing friend, Hannah Bueller, for editing and just being amazing. Thanks, Hannah.